A bark in the silence. The hospital night shift had gone quiet until the door slid open and a German shepherd walked in. No leash, no collar, just a bundle clamped in his jaws. No one moved at first. The nurses thought it was a mistake, a stray, maybe someone's emotional support animal that slipped through. Then the dog stopped, sat, and stared. The bundle shifted, a baby's hand flinched, and the silence broke. This moment, caught on camera, would echo louder than anyone expected. But what came after? The mother behind the story, the past behind the dog, that's what will stay with you. Because sometimes the faintest bark in the dark saves everything. The night at Grace Memorial Hospital settled like dust in a forgotten attic, quiet, unmoving, and deceptively still. The hum of fluorescent lights mingled with the soft click of rubber soles on polished floors. In the nurse's station, beneath the bluish-white glow of overhead lights, Lena sat cradling a warm mug of chamomile tea. It was only her second week on the night shift. "Don't get used to this," Nurse Carol said, sipping her lukewarm coffee, the bitterness matching her tired grin. "Nights like this are rare, too quiet, almost creepy." Lena smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Creepy beats chaos, right?" They both laughed, the sound echoing faintly down the long corridor where dimmed hallway lights traced empty patient rooms and closed supply closets. A janitor pushed his mop down the south wing, humming an off-key tune. Monitors beeped faintly in rhythm, slow, steady, predictable. Everything felt manageable. Lena leaned back in her chair and glanced at the board listing patients in the emergency wing. No codes, no trauma alerts. Just the occasional cough behind a curtain and the steady rhythm of machines that, for now, didn't cry out for help. Across the room, someone had left a TV mute, displaying the looping late-night weather-cooled temperatures, light wind, stars scattered across the city skyline. Lena stared at it absently, her mind adrift in thoughts of the long shift ahead. She was still adjusting to these hours when the world slept, but hospitals didn't. "Where's the weirdest place you've seen someone come in from?" she asked Carol suddenly, seeking conversation. Carol chuckled. "Once had a guy walking wearing nothing but a shower curtain and cowboy boots. Said he was attacked by squirrels on his honeymoon." Lena laughed, loud enough to draw a half glance from the orderly wheeling a supply cart past them. The tension eased a little more, and then the lights flickered. Not all at once, just a soft pulse. The kind that doesn't scream danger, but nudges something deeper, a whisper of disruption. Carol's smile faded ever so slightly. "Old wiring," she said, though Lena noticed her eyes flicked toward the entrance doors instinctively. Outside, it had grown darker than usual. The front lot's street lamps flickered too, casting elongated shadows across the pavement. "Storm coming?" Lena asked. "Not according to the forecast." They both stood when the automatic doors hissed open. No chime, no footsteps, just the soft rush of air as the glass parted. At first, no one moved. The janitor leaned his mop against the wall, squinting down the hallway. A young tech peeked over a clipboard from across the station. Then Lena took a cautious step forward, expecting a lost visitor or a dazed walk-in patient. But what came through the door made every inch of her body seize. A large German shepherd, mud-caked, limping, slightly stepped into the fluorescent light. Its eyes were focused, haunted, intelligent. In its jaws it carried something wrapped in an old tattered cloth. Carol's mug slipped from her hand and shattered on the tile floor. "What the?" she breathed. The dog didn't growl, didn't bark, didn't flinch. It walked forward with purpose, tail low, legs trembling slightly, and placed the bundle gently on the floor, just inside the emergency ward entrance. And then it backed away 2 steps, as if offering space, as if saying, "Now you." Lena froze. The entire emergency unit seemed to pause time, stretched thin between seconds. The monitors stopped beeping. The janitor stopped breathing. Then a sound broke the silence. A soft, wet cough, almost imperceptible from within the cloth. Lena didn't think. She dropped to her knees and unwrapped it with shaking hands. A gasp sliced through the air. A baby, barely a few weeks old, skin pale, lips tinged with blue, chest rising and falling in erratic jerks like a broken metronome. "Oh, my God," Lena whispered. "It's a baby. He's not breathing right." And with that, the hospital snapped back to life. "Code Blue! Get the crash cart now," Carol yelled, her voice slicing through the stunned silence. "NICU page stat. Get respiratory down here," another nurse shouted. Shoes scrambled against the tile. Alarms were triggered. Lights flipped into bright emergency mode. Stretchers appeared. The baby was lifted, oxygen mask placed over his tiny face. Nurses surrounded him, their movements sharp and urgent. Lena backed away, stunned. Her hands still trembled as she turned toward the dog who hadn't moved. He was still at the threshold, watching, eyes wide, still. And in them, something beyond instinct, something like fear and love. Carol stood beside Lena, whispering, "Where the hell did he come from?" Lena didn't answer. She couldn't. She was too busy watching the dog's eyes and realizing he wasn't just delivering the baby, he was guarding him. The hiss of the automatic doors breaking the silence was barely more than a breath, but it was enough to still every sound inside the emergency bay. At first, no one moved. The hallway beyond the glass looked empty, smeared in sodium yellow light from the flickering lot lamps. Lena stepped forward instinctively, clipboard still in her hand, her sneakers squeaking softly on the waxed tile. That's when she saw it. Out of the night stillness, a large figure emerged. A German shepherd, coated in layers of dried mud, grime, and exhaustion. Its fur, once a rich sable, was now streaked with pale dust and dark patches that clung like ghosts of the roads it had crossed. It didn't walk like a stray, it moved like a soldier. Each step was deliberate. Its body trembled ever so slightly, but its gait remained steady, composed, as if holding on for just a little longer. But what seized every heart in the room wasn't the dog. It was what he carried. In his mouth hung an old gray cloth, frayed at the edges. The bundle dangled loosely between his teeth, and with every slow movement it swayed just enough to show the unmistakable outline of something small, something limp. The shepherd stepped just past the threshold onto the sterile white floor and placed the bundle down with a care so precise it defied understanding. Then he stepped back, 1 pace, 2, and stood still. "Is that a—" someone whispered. Lena didn't wait. She dropped to her knees, ignoring the dried mud and damp cloth, and peeled the bundle back with shaking hands. Her breath caught in her throat. Inside was a baby boy, tiny, fragile. Dirt smudged across his skin. His chest moved in short, shallow gasps, barely perceptible, lips pale, forehead clammy. "Oh, God, he's not breathing right." Carol's voice sliced through the stunned silence. "Get a crash cart now." Alarms blared. The ER exploded into motion. A second nurse dropped to Lena's side, unrolling the rest of the cloth and checking the baby's pulse. "He's ice cold, weak heartbeat, dehydrated, maybe worse." "Page, NICU, stat!" someone called behind them. Another nurse tore open an emergency supply drawer, grabbing an infant oxygen mask. The whir of machines hummed to life as the infant was lifted with delicate precision onto a rolling gurney, wires, tubes, thermometers. Hands worked in fluid choreography that masked the sheer panic trembling underneath. Lena stayed close, her hand unconsciously still on the now empty cloth, its edges soaked with a dark stain she hoped wasn't blood. She looked up. The dog was still watching. From the entrance, the shepherd stood tall, despite the shake in its legs. He didn't bark. He didn't move. He just stared, eyes locked on the child, now surrounded by humans, machines, and urgency. There was no fear in his face, no confusion, only purpose. The kind of purpose only earned through instinct, memory, and something deeper than command. Lena's voice cracked. "Where did you come from?" The dog didn't blink. The bundle was gone, but his mission wasn't over. He remained exactly where he had been, like a silent statue carved from loyalty and dirt. Carol knelt beside Lena, breathless. "I've worked 20 years in this place. I've seen car wrecks, house fires, even babies born in the lobby. But this, I've never seen." A security guard approached slowly, radio crackling at his belt. "What do we do with the dog?" "Don't touch him," Lena said too quickly. The dog growled, just once. Low, quiet, not aggressive, but clear. Carol raised a hand. "He's not a stray. Look at his posture. That's training." A doctor's voice rang out across the ER. "O2 levels are rising. Keep warming him. Let's get IV access. Try his foot. Stay with him." Hope clung to every syllable. The tension in the room began to shift, not from panic to calm, but from terror to controlled urgency. And still, the dog watched. A nurse with kind eyes approached the shepherd, slowly, crouching down. "You brought him here, didn't you?" she said, her voice a whisper. "You knew." He didn't wag his tail, didn't acknowledge the voice. But he didn't move either. He remained perfectly still, like a soldier awaiting orders. Lena stood again, heart thudding. She looked down at the cloth, now balled in her hand. It smelled faintly of mildew and something else. Something sad. The kind of smell that clings to desperation. She glanced back at the child, now under warming lamps, machines gently feeding air into his tiny lungs. He was fighting, just like the dog had fought, just like someone somewhere had once hoped they might make it. And now they were here, alive, because of him. "Call animal control," someone muttered. Lena stepped in. "No, not yet." Carol frowned. "Lena, look at him," she said softly. "You think a stray carried a baby through God knows what and brought him to a hospital? No, he's more than that. He belongs to someone, or he used to." A long silence followed. Then a small voice from the NICU nurse's bay broke through. "Vitals stabilizing, weak but steady." A murmur of cautious relief spread like ripples. Lena's eyes welled, not with fear this time, but awe. She walked toward the dog, slowly, hands open, low. "I don't know who you are," she whispered, "but thank you." For the first time, the shepherd blinked, then turned his head just slightly back toward the door, like he was waiting. The emergency bay became a symphony of urgency, every beep, click, and shouted instruction, a note in the frantic score of survival. The infant, frail breath barely registering, was cradled in gloved hands as the team wheeled him into Trauma Room 3. His tiny chest rose in stuttering gasps, each breath shallow, like the world was asking him to stay, but giving him no reason to. "BP's dropping. Pulse is thready," a nurse called out. "Get that warming unit closer. We need to elevate his core temperature. Where's respiratory?" "On the way." Lena stood just inside the threshold, heart hammering against her ribs. She wasn't part of the NICU team, but she couldn't walk away, not after what she'd seen, not after he had brought the baby to them. The German shepherd, still unnamed, still unmoving, remained at the edge of the trauma bay, his body half shadowed by the hallway lights. He made no move to follow, no noise to draw attention. He simply watched. Through the doorway, his eyes locked on the table where the baby lay, a tangle of IV lines and electrodes, a too small oxygen mask nestled over his mouth. Not a sound escaped him, but his eyes, deep and steady, burned with something more intense than fear: purpose. "Temperature's 93. We're climbing, but he's still cold. Get a line in that scalp vein. We can't waste time. Watch his oxygen. Don't oversaturate." The orders kept coming like waves crashing against a shore. Technicians adjusted monitors. A doctor hovered over the baby's chest, pressing softly, rhythmically. Another nurse drew a tiny syringe of dextrose, her hands steady despite the tightness in her jaw. "He's maybe 4 weeks old," the lead doctor murmured. "No formula, no diaper change. This kid's been out there for a while." Lena flinched at the thought. How long had he been cold? Alone? Was he ever held, truly held? Behind her, a small gasp caught her attention. It was Carol standing a few feet back, staring at the shepherd. "He hasn't moved," she whispered. Lena turned. The dog remained in the same position, ears forward, shoulders squared, as if standing at attention, as if waiting for the verdict. Another nurse passed Lena, nearly brushing against her shoulder, vitals stabilizing slightly, but he's still on the edge. "We need to get him into NICU for observation once he's clear for transport." The baby stirred, barely. A flicker of fingers, a twitch of a leg, a whisper of life. The moment hung there, trembling between hope and devastation. Lena swallowed the lump in her throat. Her voice cracked. "What are the chances?" The attending physician didn't look up. "I've seen less survive, and I've seen more not make it." That wasn't an answer, but maybe it was the only one that could be given right now. Outside the trauma bay, the shepherd shifted for the first time. Not much, just the slightest lowering of his head, as if listening more closely, as if reading the pulse of the room. His legs were trembling now. Fatigue had begun to seep through his muscles. His coat still clung to dried mud and brittle leaves, but the mission wasn't done, not yet. "Someone needs to call animal control," another staffer muttered as they passed. Lena turned sharply, He stays. The staffer blinked. Excuse me? She stepped forward, her voice lower now, firmer. He brought that baby here. He didn't attack anyone. He didn't panic. He just brought him. Carol chimed in, quieter but insistent. He hasn't taken his eyes off the baby. That's not coincidence. That's something else. The staffer hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. No one had an explanation. No one knew how or why. But it didn't matter, because he had done what no one else did. He brought the child to them. Inside the trauma room, the tone on the heart monitor began to shift. The beep grew steadier, slower, stronger. Okay, that's good. The respiratory therapist breathed. He's responding. His color's coming back. The doctor checked the IV, gave a small nod. We bought time. Let's not waste it. Prep for NICU transfer. One of the nurses, older, silver hair coiled in a tight bun, glanced up. We still have no ID, no name, no file. Start one, the doctor said, eyes still on the baby. Call him what you want for now. The nurse hesitated, then looked toward the door, toward the dog still standing there, silent and still. Shadow, she whispered. Let's call him Shadow's boy. Lena turned. The shepherd blinked, slowly, and finally sat down. The gurney rolled down the hallway minutes later, monitors and tubes trailing behind. As the baby passed, the shepherd stood, again slowly, stiffly, but with dignity. He stepped toward the corridor and fell in beside the stretcher, as if escorting it down the hall. No one tried to stop him. No one dared. At the NICU wing, they halted just inside the doors. The baby was rolled away into a sterile room beyond the glass. The shepherd didn't try to follow. He just stood there, watching, waiting. A nurse passed and reached out, gently brushing a hand over his back. You brought him to us. Now let us bring him back. The shepherd didn't move, but there was something in the way his body relaxed, barely, that said he understood, or maybe hoped. Lena turned away from the glass. She didn't know the dog's name, didn't know his story, but somehow, deep in her bones, she knew this was only the beginning. In the sterile calm of the NICU, machines beeped a rhythm no one dared interrupt. The baby, his skin now a touch warmer, his chest rising with steadier breaths, lay beneath a cocoon of wearers and careful attention. Nurses moved with quiet urgency, adjusting oxygen flow, noting vitals, calibrating care second by second. But just outside the sliding glass partition, the hospital's second mystery stood still, the dog. The mud-caked German shepherd hadn't moved from his place since the moment the stretcher vanished behind frosted glass. His body was taut, tired, but controlled, like a statue held together by muscle memory alone. And his eyes, those unblinking, unwavering eyes, never left the baby. Lena sat nearby, slumped against a hallway bench, arms wrapped around her knees. Her scrubs were wrinkled, her heart still thudding from the chaos. She hadn't meant to stay this long. Her shift had ended an hour ago, but her feet wouldn't carry her out the door, not yet. Her gaze returned to the dog. You haven't moved an inch. Carol stood beside her, arms crossed. He doesn't even flinch. I offered water 10 minutes ago. He just looked at me. A passing nurse paused. No collar, no tag. He's chipped, right? We tried a scan twice, Carol said. He backed off both times. Didn't growl, didn't bark, just retreated. He's watching that room like it's his whole world, Lena murmured. Another staffer tried a slow approach. He knelt a few feet away, holding a dish of water. Easy there, buddy. You're safe now. The dog's ears flicked. His stance stiffened, but he didn't growl. His eyes briefly scanned the man, then returned to the NICU door. Doesn't even blink, the staffer said, setting the bowl down before backing away. Lena finally rose to her feet. Something in her chest wouldn't let her walk past him without trying. She approached slowly, carefully, like one might approach a soldier mid-duty. "Hey," she said gently. The shepherd's gaze flicked to her just once, then back to the door. "You brought him here," Lena whispered. "You knew." No response. But she felt it, something unspoken. Not fear, not confusion, just certainty. He hadn't stumbled upon the hospital. He'd chosen it. Like this was a mission, a delivery, a last resort made with last strength. "He's not a stray," Lena said over her shoulder. "I've seen strays. They're scattered, hungry, wild. He's none of that." Carol nodded. "He's something else. Trained, maybe. He's protecting the baby." They all felt it, even now, with no barking, no growling, no noise at all. His body language told the story clearly. "Come too close, and you'll have to go through me." A doctor from NICU stepped out minutes later, wiping his hands on a cloth. "He's stable," he announced. "Still weak, but responding well. No internal trauma we can see, just dehydration, exposure, and malnutrition." The hallway let out a collective breath. Carol asked, "Any idea how long he was out there?" "Hard to say," the doctor replied. "Could have been days. No formula, no clothing under the wrap. He's lucky." His eyes drifted to the shepherd. "Or someone made sure he got lucky." They all turned to look. The dog still hadn't moved. Lena finally took another step forward. Closer this time. His ears shifted, but he didn't back up. She crouched down beside him, careful not to meet his eyes directly, just enough to speak low, almost like talking to a child. "I don't know who you are or where you came from, but you didn't just show up. You chose this place. You carried him all this way, and you waited." The shepherd flicked his tail once, barely a twitch. "You knew this was the only shot he had." Silence answered her, but it didn't feel empty. It felt intentional. Another nurse approached from behind. "We're going to have to report this. You know that, right? Animal control needs to take him in." Lena stood. "And put him where? In a kennel?" "It's protocol. He's unchipped, unteched, unidentified. He could be dangerous." Lena shook her head slowly. "He brought us a baby. That doesn't make him safe." Lena stared at the dog again. "He hasn't barked, hasn't growled, hasn't even moved. He's not guarding himself. He's guarding that baby. That's not a threat. That's loyalty." The nurse didn't argue. She just walked away, scribbling notes onto a chart. Behind the glass, the baby's tiny hand shifted. A twitch, a curl of fingers. Shadow, though no one had said his name yet, perked his ears. His eyes narrowed slightly, not in aggression, but in attention. He recognized the change. He had been waiting for it. Not many noticed, but Lena did. The shepherd leaned forward slightly, nose almost touching the base of the NICU door. He couldn't see the child now, but he knew. Somewhere deep in the neural patterns of training, scent memory, and something closer to love than instinct, he knew the child was breathing again. And with that knowledge, he sat, not collapsed, sat, as if checking off a box in an invisible ledger. Delivery successful. Mission ongoing. Lena stayed near him for the next hour, occasionally checking on the baby, occasionally speaking to the dog in soft murmurs. He didn't respond. But he didn't walk away either, and every time someone passed too close to the NICU entrance, he stood again, just a little straighter, still watching, still guarding, still silent. And in that silence there was something louder than any bark. Something that said, "He is mine. I brought him. I stay until he is safe." The low rumble of terrors echoed across the hospital parking lot as a black unmarked cruiser pulled into the emergency lane. Headlights cutting through the last stretch of pre-dawn mist. The driver's side door opened slowly, and a tall man stepped out, broad-shouldered, graying at the temples, and moving with the ease of someone who had spent years carrying more than weight on his belt. Sergeant Ray Morales didn't look like much at first glance, but the moment he stepped inside Grace Memorial, every nurse and officer present turned just slightly toward him, some out of habit, others out of quiet respect. Morales was a K-9 veteran, retired field handler, now working consults for cases involving dogs too specialized or too unpredictable for the standard approach. And he knew what he was walking into. "They said he carried a baby in," he murmured, his voice rough from years of commanding both men and animals. "Didn't bite, didn't bark, just walked in and waited." "That's what they're saying," the young officer beside him replied. "He hasn't moved in hours." Morales adjusted the strap of the soft tactical bag over his shoulder and nodded once. "Let me see him." They led him past the reception bay and into the hallway just outside NICU. The German Shepherd was still there, sitting, watching, not flinching at the buzz of pagers or the squeak of shoes. His body was dirt-stained, ribs slightly showing under the mat of his coat, but his posture remained upright, eyes fixed on the closed door just feet away. Morales stopped 10 feet out. His breath caught for a moment, almost imperceptibly. "God," he muttered, "he's still on post." Lena, standing nearby, looked up. "What do you mean?" He stepped forward, slowly. "Look at his line of sight, his balance. See the back legs? Slight shift every few minutes to relieve tension without lowering alert. The ear flicks? He's not just watching, he's monitoring. Room sounds, movement, scent flow." He crouched halfway, resting his arms on his knees. "This one's trained." Lena exhaled like someone had finally put words to what her gut already knew. "I knew he wasn't just a stray." Morales nodded. "No doubt in my mind. That's law enforcement posture. Military, maybe, could be search and rescue, hard to tell from here." The shepherd shifted slightly, now aware of Morales. His ears flicked once, not backward, not down, just angled an adjustment, not a submission. Morales saw it, read it like a line of code. "He sees me," he said, "but doesn't recognize the uniform." "You think he's waiting for someone?" Morales didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his bag slowly and pulled out a standard lead black nylon, worn smooth in the center from years of command pulls. He held it loosely in one hand and spoke, not to the people, not to the room, but directly to the dog. "Hey, partner, you've done good. You got him here. You're not alone anymore." No reaction, but no rejection either. Morales took a cautious step forward, then another. The hallway quieted. Every nurse, tech, and officer nearby froze in silent anticipation. 10 feet became 8, then 6. Still, the shepherd didn't move. His gaze darted briefly toward Morales' left hand, noting the leash. "Easy," Morales whispered. "No pressure, no threat." He crouched again, just outside the dog's reach. "I've been where you are," he said softly, "carrying more than you should, holding on because there's no one else left to do it." The shepherd's head tilted just slightly. Morales unzipped a pocket and produced a small packet-dried liver treats, the kind used in field training. He opened it, let the scent drift. "Bet it's been a while since you've had anything that didn't come from a trash bin." No growl, no warning, just the quiet flick of a nostril flare. He placed the treat on the floor, then backed up half a step. The shepherd's gaze stayed on Morales for several seconds longer. Then, slowly, he stepped forward, one paw, then another. He took the treat carefully, deliberately, not like an animal starving, but like a soldier inspecting rations from a new supplier. Then he sat again. Same position, same posture. Morales didn't smile. Not yet. But his fingers tightened around the leash as he stepped forward the final few inches. "I don't want to command you," he said, "but I need to walk with you. Will you let me?" The dog didn't break eye contact, so Morales made the choice. He leaned in gently, clipped the leash to the old collar, frayed, faded, but still strong. The shepherd didn't flinch, didn't resist, just stood. A full-body exhale followed, not from fear, but release, like he'd been holding the weight of the world in his bones, and finally, someone had offered to share it. "Yeah," Morales whispered. "That's what I thought." Lena stepped closer. "So, what now?" Morales rose. "Now we see where he came from, because he's not lost, he's delivered something, and whatever's behind that, it's not over." He gave the leash a gentle tug. "Let's go, Shadow." The dog didn't look back. He just began to walk. The leash barely tugged as Shadow moved forward. No hesitation, no confusion, no glances back. His gait, though tired, was focused. Each paw found pavement like it remembered this route by heart. Morales said nothing. He didn't need to. The shepherd had assumed the lead, not by force, but by intent. Behind them, 2 uniformed officers trailed quietly, their radios muted, flashlights lowered. The energy was different now, less about containment, more about trust. "Where's he taking us?" one of them asked in a hushed voice, half to Morales, half to the thick air between street lamps. Morales didn't respond. He just kept pace beside the dog. The city outside Grace Memorial was still half asleep. Distant sirens whined like fading echoes. Steam hissed from a manhole grate as they turned down Westfield Street, the shepherd's steps never faltering. It was eerie. No sniffing, no circling, no barking at passing shadows, just purpose. Lena had followed them out the door, standing just beneath the ER canopy. Her arms crossed tightly over her chest, not from cold, but from awe. The moment felt unreal, like she was watching something ancient and sacred unfold, something primal wrapped in concrete and streetlight. Morales didn't look back at her. He just raised one hand, 3 fingers extended, a silent thank you. Then he was gone, swallowed into the dim streets with Shadow at his side. They walked for blocks, past shuttered corner stores, their neon signs flickering with half-hearted light, past bus stops where no one waited, past rows of houses still wrapped in the stillness of sleep. The dog didn't waver. His path twisted through side streets and alleyways, like tracing muscle memory worn deep into instinct. "He's not looking for something," Morales finally muttered under his breath. "He's returning." They reached an industrial lot bordered by a chain-link fence. The shepherd led them around the edge, not through the gate, and continued along the back service road. The concrete shifted to gravel. The air got colder. Morales glanced at his team. "Stay sharp. Should we call for backup?" "Not yet." Shadow's pace slowed slightly, but his head never turned. He followed invisible scent trails with the kind of clarity that training alone couldn't explain. Whatever had driven him this far wasn't just the task. It was the memory that came with it. The leash stayed slack. Morales didn't lead. He followed, and he knew better than to interrupt. Every now and then, the shepherd paused, not out of fatigue, but to verify. A quick sniff of a lamp-post base, a single look at a rusted doorframe, then onward. "You seeing this?" one officer whispered, "like he's reading a map only he can see." "No," Morales said, eyes fixed, like he's retracing a goodbye. They crossed beneath a bridge, the road overhead thrumming with early traffic. Shadow's ears twitched, but his focus didn't break. He veered left at a fork and led them into a narrow corridor of abandoned duplexes, windows shattered, roofs caved in. The group slowed. "This doesn't look good," the officer muttered. Morales's jaw clenched. "We're close." "How do you know?" "Because he just changed." They all looked at the shepherd. His ears were up, tail low, his breathing shallower now, like the air itself had thickened with something heavy memory, scent, something only he could parse. He took a final turn. The alley narrowed into a back lot lined with waist-high weeds. At the end stood a dilapidated house, weather-worn, sagging inward, the porch railing broken in 2 places. One shutter hung crooked like a dead limb. The front door, slightly ajar. Shadow stopped, right at the base of the path. He didn't bark, didn't move, he just stared. Morales stepped forward slowly, eyes scanning the building. "No broken windows," he murmured. "Door wasn't forced, and he stopped here. This is it." "You sure?" Morales looked down at the dog. Shadow's body was tense, but not in fear. It was the tension of knowing. The kind soldiers carry when returning to a battlefield they never wanted to leave. "Yeah," Morales said, "I'm sure." He unclipped the leash. The shepherd didn't run ahead. He simply took the lead again, calmly walking toward the house, as if every creak of the porch boards had been memorized long ago. The officers drew their weapons cautiously. Morales raised a hand. "No sudden moves. Let him guide." Shadow stepped over the threshold into the darkness. They followed. The trail had ended, but something else was just beginning. The porch groaned under the weight of worn boots and silent questions. Shadow stepped forward first, paws moving with reluctant precision, like every inch of wood beneath him held a memory he didn't want to disturb. The leash now hung loose at his side, Morales having unclipped it moments earlier in quiet acknowledgement. This part belonged to the dog. The house loomed before them, more ruin than structure. Siding curled from the frame like sunburned skin, and windows stared back with vacant, soot-ringed eyes. A rusted wind chime clinked against itself in the breeze, its sound hollow, out of tune, forgotten. The front door was half open, hanging on one hinge, not kicked in, not forced, left open deliberately or desperately. Morales raised his fist. The two officers behind him froze in formation. "Guns up," he said quietly, "but no noise. We treat this like a live scene." He turned to the shepherd, who stood at the threshold now, unmoving. "You ready?" he asked. Shadow didn't look at him. He simply stepped inside. The moment they crossed the doorframe, the smell hit them. Mold, stale air, rotting food, but beneath it all, something more human, desperation. The sour scent of weeks without cleaning, of things left behind in a hurry. Like a chapter of someone's life had been torn out mid-sentence and never returned. One of the officers gagged softly. "God, hold it together," Morales said. His voice was low, steady, but beneath it there was something tighter, something restrained. Shadow walked ahead, weaving between overturned chairs and scattered laundry. The living room looked as if it had once been lived in with love and then abandoned with fear. Drawings hung on the wall, crayon stick figures beneath the faded scrawl of a child's name, Noah. Morales noted them, every detail, the uneven stack of unopened mail, a half-eaten can of soup, tipped over on the counter, crumbs, trailing toward a bowl on the floor, empty now, dry and cracked. The shepherd sniffed the air once, then veered toward the hallway. "This place looks ransacked," one officer whispered. "No," Morales corrected. "It looks left, in a rush." They reached a narrow corridor. Peeling wallpaper slithered down the walls in strips. A single bulb flickered overhead, buzzing softly like a dying insect. Shadow paused. Morales tensed. His hand dropped instinctively toward his holster. The shepherd turned left into a small room near the back of the house. The door was ajar, just like the front one. Morales pushed it open gently with his foot. The hinges wailed like something in pain. And there, in the far corner of the room, stood a crib. It wasn't clean, it wasn't neat, but it had been used. A threadbare blanket sagged inside it, still indented in the middle. A half-empty bottle lay on its side beneath the mattress. There were toys, too dusty, mismatched, a rubber giraffe, a chewed corner of a children's book. Shadow stepped toward the crib with silent reverence. Then he lay down beside it, not collapse-placed himself beside it, as if returning to where he was always meant to be. Morales exhaled slowly. "He stayed here," he whispered, "with the baby." One of the officers stepped closer, brushing his flashlight along the cracked walls. "Sir, over here." Morales turned. On the small desk near the window sat a piece of paper, creased and stained but carefully folded. Beside it was a photo, a young woman holding a baby wrapped in a flannel blanket, the same blanket now in NICU, the same blanket Shadow had carried in his jaws. Morales picked up the letter. It wasn't long. The handwriting trembled. "I don't know how much longer I can do this. I've failed in every way that matters. But Max never left us. He's stronger than me. He'll know what to do. If anyone finds this, please understand. I did it for him, for Noah. I pray one of you will forgive me someday. No signature, just an indent below the last word where a tear had fallen and dried. Morales folded the letter quietly. Max, he murmured, looking toward the shepherd. That's your name? The dog looked up briefly, his eyes glassy, then lowered his head back to the floor beside the crib. One of the officers ran a hand over his face. Jesus, she trusted him more than herself. Wouldn't you? Morales said quietly. He got the baby across miles of city, through traffic, weather, fear, found the one place that might save him. He crouched beside the shepherd, hand resting gently on the scruff of his neck. You didn't leave your post, even when no one else stayed. Outside the wind picked up. Curtains fluttered slightly through a cracked bedroom window. Somewhere in the distance, a siren echoed, faint, removed from the stillness inside this house. And inside this room, the truth settled like dust. This wasn't just an abandoned home. It was a battlefield of choices, of exhaustion, of surrender, and of one silent guardian who refused to give up. Morales stood. Secure the scene, he said quietly. Bag the letter, photo, and anything baby-related. We've got a story here, one the world's going to need to hear. He looked down at Shadow Max one more time. You held the line, he whispered. Now it's our turn. The room didn't just smell of mildew and rot. It smelled like memory, like something once tender that had been left too long in the dark. Morales moved through the space carefully, his boots stepping between toys and scraps of life left behind. He paused beside the crib, a simple wooden frame, cracked at one edge, its paint peeling from age and neglect inside. The mattress was dented, the shape of a small body still impressed into its surface. A tattered blanket lay tangled at the center soft flannel, faded blue with worn yellow stars. A corner was crusted with dried formula, the kind of wear that comes not from neglect but from overuse. Reuse, the act of making something last when nothing else will. Near the crib, 2 empty dog bowls sat. One still held a few broken pieces of kibble, long hardened. The other had nothing but dust, shadow. No, Max lay beside it in still silence, his head resting against the leg of the crib like he'd never truly left. His eyes didn't close. He was still on duty, always had been. One of the officers swept a flashlight across the room. The beam caught a wall of Polaroids taped in uneven rows. Most were faded, some too warped to make out, but a few still clung to color. A woman, dark hair and a messy bun, tired eyes, but smiling, holding a baby against her chest. Another, the baby asleep in the crib, Max curled beside it like a shadow stitched into the floor. Another, the woman outside the house, in the early morning sun, shielding her eyes with one hand, a bottle in the other, and Max in the background, sitting by the door. They weren't perfect photos, but they told a perfect truth. This had once been home. Morales crossed to the makeshift dining table, a card table covered in junk mail, old bottles, and 3 open cans of soup, all half empty. A rusted tin fork sat in the middle, still resting on a stained napkin. He brushed aside a pile of wrinkled flyers and found it an envelope. The paper was yellowing, sealed but soft, as if it had been written days ago and touched 100 times since. He opened it carefully. His eyes moved slowly, the silence deepening with every word. There wasn't much left, just me and Shadow. He stayed when everyone else didn't. He knew when the baby was hungry before I did. He barked when the air turned too cold, when I stopped getting out of bed. He kept feeding Noah. I think he understands more than anyone gives him credit for. I'm not proud of what I'm doing, but I believe in him. I only had Shadow left. He'll know what to do. No name, no date, no goodbye, just belief in a dog who had never once left his post. Morales lowered the letter. The room pressed in around him, this skeleton of a life, still holding on to breath even after its owners had slipped away. He looked to the officer beside him. Print that crib, dust everything in here, no details too small. There's a story behind every crack in these walls. The officer nodded, setting to work with his kit. Across the room, Max lifted his head slowly. He sniffed the air, then let out a soft, low whine, not the kind born of pain or warning, the kind born of missing something that isn't coming back. He's been waiting here, Morales murmured. God knows how long. No food, no noise, just waiting for someone to walk through that door. Or waiting for the courage to leave it, the younger officer replied. In the corner of the room sat a diaper bag, partially unzipped. Inside were wipes, an empty bottle, and a single stuffed animal, a lion, the seams coming loose at the neck. Morales picked it up, turning it over in his hands. One ear was chewed nearly flat. Shadow's doing probably a long time ago, when this place had more laughter than silence. Back on the table, something slid from beneath the envelope. Morales reached for it and pulled out a folded photo. This one was different. It showed Max and a man in uniform, military or police. Unclear from the photos where posing in front of a training facility. Max's coat was shinier, eyes younger, but the stance was unmistakable. He was trained, Morales said. Look at the way he's sitting here, even now. He hasn't broken posture. He was a working dog. You think she rescued him? The officer asked. Or he rescued her, Morales replied. He crouched again beside Max, who shifted but didn't pull away. You never quit, did you? He said quietly. Max blinked once. His nose brushed against the blanket edge inside the crib. Outside, the wind rattled the loose shutter on the second floor. The sound echoed like a memory. This place wasn't just a shelter. It was a last stand. A mother trying to hold on, a dog refusing to let go, a child caught in the middle, and now only one of them had the strength left to carry the story forward. Morales rose slowly. Let's get forensics in here, and someone call Child Protective. If we're lucky, the mother's still out there. He looked once more at Max, silent, steady, grieving in his own quiet way. You kept him alive, he said, and now we're going to do the same for you. The house had gone still again, not the silence of peace, no. This was the hush that followed a storm, when everything broken had already fallen, and all that remained was the weight of what survived. Shadow stood in the middle of the room, his head slightly bowed, paws planted at the base of the crib. He didn't whine, didn't make a sound. He simply stared into that small wooden frame where the child had once been, where warmth had lived, where breath had curled like fog over sleep. His body stood just a little. None of them spoke. Morales knew what was happening before it did. He took a slow step forward, reaching instinctively toward the shepherd's flank. But Shadow moved first. With a deliberate, final motion, he lowered his body to the floor, beside the crib, pressing his side against the baseboard like it was the only anchor that mattered. One front paw folded underneath his chest. The other remained stretched forward, almost touching the hollow where the baby had once laid. And then he exhaled a long, shuddering breath that seemed to carry everything out of him. The miles he had walked, the days without sleep, the hunger he had ignored, the fear he had never shown. He let it go and lay still. One officer lowered his weapon, his voice barely above a whisper. "Is he okay?" Morales knelt down, hand steadying on the shepherd's ribs. Still rising, still falling, slow but solid. "He's breathing," Morales said softly. "He's just finished." Another pause. One of the officers scratched the back of his neck, eyes flicking across the room, photos, bowls, toys, the letter. "He really stayed here the whole time, didn't he?" Morales nodded once. "Yeah." He looked at Shadow again, voice dropping lower. "He never left the boy." The sentence hit harder than anyone expected. In that moment, every small detail in the room, every scratch on the floor, every paw print embedded in old dust became evidence, not of crime, but of commitment. Max Shadow had stood watch while the world forgot this place, while help didn't come, while the mother faded, while hope thinned to nothing. He had waited. And when it became clear that waiting wasn't enough, he'd carried the child himself. No leash, no orders, no backup, just a worn blanket in his jaws, and a destination burned somewhere deep in memory. Carol entered the room quietly, holding a radio against her shoulder. "They're sending a trauma counselor and someone from child welfare. Naikyu says the baby's stable for now, still weak, but holding." Morales gave a slow nod. "Good, that's good." Her eyes drifted to the shepherd lying by the crib, her breath caught. "He's not going to move, is he?" "No," Morales said. "Not until someone tells him it's over. Can you?" Morales glanced at Shadow, at the weight in his eyes, at the way his body pressed into the crib as if to fuse himself to memory, and shook his head. "I think he'll know when it is." Outside, rain began to pell. Soft at first, just a whisper against broken shingles and the creak of sagging gutters. It bled through a crack in the ceiling, falling drop by drop onto the worn floorboards. Shadow didn't stir. For the first time, he allowed himself stillness, not born of duty, but of surrender. He had given all he had, every muscle, every instinct, every ounce of willpower, burned and spent in a single unwavering mission: protect the boy. And now that boy was warm, safe, breathing. His job, his purpose was no longer needed. Morales sat beside him, leaning back against the same wall, arms crossed over his knees. He didn't speak. He didn't touch him again. He just sat there with him, officer to officer, man to dog, soul to soul. The younger officer returned with a water bottle, crouched beside the bowls. He poured carefully, letting the water glisten under the flashlight's beam. "Here, buddy," he said. "You've earned it." Shadow didn't drink, but his ears twitched. He knew. Forensics would come. Questions would follow. The mother's name would surface. The media would spin its story. Hero dog saves abandoned infant. That's what the headlines would say. But none of them would capture the real truth. The truth was not that Shadow had saved the child. It was that he had refused to let him die when the lights were off, when no one was looking, when no cameras were rolling and no one even knew there was a life to be saved. He chose to fight anyway, to carry the weight, to walk the distance, to hold the line alone. Morales finally stood. He looked down at the dog still curled beside the crib. "I've worked with a lot of cake," he said quietly, "seen some brave ones, but I've never seen anything like you." Shadow didn't respond. He just breathed, and in that breath there was peace. The house was quiet now, cordoned off, catalogued, and dim, under the weight of so many unanswered questions. Outside, the gray morning mist had turned to a light drizzle. Yellow police tape flapped in the breeze, a whisper-thin reminder that the place had gone from forgotten to official. Morales stood at the edge of the porch, reading the letter again. No signature, just the desperate scrawl. "I only had Shadow left. He'll know what to do." That was it. No names, no contact, no breadcrumbs, only faith in a dog that had done the impossible. He folded the note carefully and slipped it into an evidence sleeve, then turned as one of the officers came jogging up the walkway. "We canvassed 4 homes on this street," the officer said. Only 2 had anyone home. First one said they hadn't seen the place occupied in months. But the second, Morales raised an eyebrow. The officer nodded. "Old guy, name's Henry Carter, lives 2 doors down. Says he remembers a woman and a dog. Said he saw her almost every day for a while." "Let's go," Morales said. Henry Carter lived in a single-story home with a sagging porch swing and a plastic flamingo buried in dead grass. He answered the door with a slight tremor in his hand and more curiosity than caution. "You the police?" "Yes, sir," Morales said, showing his badge. "I'm Sergeant Morales. We're trying to identify someone who used to live a few doors down. We believe she recently vacated the premises." Henry nodded slowly. "You mean the girl with the baby? You remember her?" He gestured them inside, waving toward the living room. "Not many folks pass through here anymore. Kind of neighborhood people forget." Inside, the home was cluttered but warm. A radio played faint classical music from the kitchen. "She kept to herself mostly," Henry said, lowering himself into a recliner. "But I saw her every few mornings, around 6 or 7. She'd take the baby out in a carrier. That dog of hers was always with her." Morales sat forward slightly. "What kind of dog?" "Big one. German shepherd, I think. Real quiet. Walked beside her like they were tethered." That matched Shadow's every step. Controlled. Intentional. "Do you remember her name?" Henry blinked, then nodded. "Ava? Yeah. Pretty sure that was it. I heard her say it once to the baby. Real soft. Kind of name you say when you don't expect anyone to hear." Morales exhaled slowly. "Ava seemed like a good mom. Just tired, you know. That kind of tired that shows in the shoulders, not the eyes. Like she was carrying more than groceries home." The old man looked down at his hands. "She got thinner every week, like she was disappearing inch by inch." Morales nodded. "Did she ever mention family? Friends?" "Not once. She never came with anyone, never had visitors. Just her, the baby, and that dog." The officer standing beside Morales scribbled in his notepad. Henry continued, "She used to sit on her porch real early. Sometimes I'd see her just staring. No coffee, no phone, nothing, just silence. That dog always right next to her, head on her knee like he could feel whatever she was feeling." "Did you ever see her leave in a hurry?" Morales asked. The old man paused. "No, but one night I thought I heard something. A car door, maybe. Around 2 or 3 in the morning. By the time I looked out the window, there was just darkness." Morales stood. "Thank you, Mr. Carter. You've been more help than you know." Henry followed them to the door. "I always wondered what happened to her. Always hoped she was okay. She didn't deserve to disappear." Back outside, the rain had stopped. Morales stepped onto the curb, staring down the road in the direction Max had come from. "You think she's still out there?" the officer beside him asked. Morales didn't answer right away. His eyes drifted to the mud-streaked path Shadow had taken, the one that led them here, a trail of quiet decisions that had changed everything. "She sent him with the baby," Morales said finally. "Didn't leave a number, didn't leave a name, but she left a dog who never failed her." "You think she was trying to die?" "No," Morales said. "I think she was trying to make sure her child didn't." He pulled out his phone. "Put out a notice for Ava. Caucasian female, mid-20s, possibly in distress. Make contact a priority." Then he looked at the officer squarely. "She gave up everything she had left. That kind of person doesn't run. She hides." Back at the patrol car, Max sat curled in the back seat, head up, eyes watching through the cage partition, the dry dirt still clinging to his coat. Morales opened the rear door and crouched beside him. "We found her name," he said quietly. "Oh, chit." The dog didn't blink, but there was a flicker, something quiet and deep, like recognition that passed through the eyes instead of the ears. Morales reached in and touched his collar gently. "She trusted you to carry him," he said. "Now we'll find her, I promise." By mid-morning, the city had shed its gray drizzle and slipped into a fragile kind of stillness. Streets damp, sky bruised with leftover clouds, and a wind that carried the scent of rain and cold concrete. Morales stood beside his cruiser, coffee in hand, the kind of lukewarm caffeine that did little but keep the hands occupied. On the dashboard sat a printout of the composite sketch they'd pulled together from neighbors' memories and the photo found at the house. Ava, 20-something, tired eyes, thin frame, a quiet sadness you didn't see unless you were looking for it. He was looking. The radio on his hip crackled. "Unit 4, we've completed sweeps at both downtown shelters. Negative matches." "Copy," Morales replied. "Check the church near Eastfield next. She may avoid official spaces." He turned to Officer Hill, already scanning through tip reports on a tablet. Anything?" Hill frowned. "Got something, maybe. A groundskeeper down at Adams Park reported a woman sitting alone by the pond. Says she's been there on and off for a few nights. No dog. Looks cold. Looks lost." Morales didn't hesitate. "Let's go." They reached Adams Park 20 minutes later. It wasn't the kind of place people went to disappear, but it was a place people went when they already had. Sprawling trees and wooden benches formed a makeshift sanctuary in the middle of the city, but time and budget cuts had turned its edges ragged. There were no children laughing today, just crows and wind and leaves that crunched beneath the weight of quiet footsteps. Morales walked the perimeter first, scanning every bench, every path, every shadow beneath the trees. And then he saw her. She sat curled at the edge of a rusted bench facing the pond, arms wrapped around herself. Her jeans were torn at the knees, hair tangled, a hood pulled low over her face. But the shape of her, the way her shoulders hunched inward, as if protecting something that was no longer there. It was her. Morales slowed his pace. She didn't look up. Her fingers clenched the fabric of her hoodie so tight her knuckles had gone white. He stopped 5 feet away and spoke low, like he was waking someone from a nightmare. "Ava?" Nothing. He took one slow step closer. "My name's Ray. I'm with the police. I'm not here to hurt you." Still, she didn't move, but her breathing changed, shallow, faster. He lowered his voice further. "We found your son." At that, her body went rigid. Her head turned slightly, just enough for one eye to peek from beneath the tangled curtain of hair. "What? What did you say?" "Your baby. The one Shadow brought to the hospital. He's alive. He's stable." Her lips parted, then trembled. "Noah?" Morales nodded. "He's safe. Right now, he's surrounded by doctors and nurses who are doing everything they can to help him." Her entire body began to shake, not from cold, but from the kind of emotional whiplash that only comes after days of silence and hopelessness. She covered her mouth with both hands and let out a sound that wasn't quite a sob and wasn't quite a gasp. Just pure, raw disbelief. "I didn't think he'd make it," she whispered. "I didn't think—" Her knees buckled as she sat back harder against the bench. Morales stepped forward, slow and careful. "You did what you had to," he said. "You made the only choice you could. You sent him with the one being you trusted." Her voice cracked. "Shadow. He did it, Ava. He got him there." She broke. Her shoulders shook as the tears came, spilling silently down her cheeks, her hands still pressed to her face like she wasn't ready to be seen again. Morales sat on the far edge of the bench. He didn't touch her, didn't interrupt. He let her grieve the fear, let her feel the weight, let her understand this wasn't failure. This was survival. Officer Hill approached quietly and handed Morales a thermal blanket and a bottle of water. Morales offered both without a word. Ava accepted the blanket with trembling fingers, draping it around her like armor that had arrived just a little too late. She opened the bottle, took one sip, then held it between her knees. "What happens now?" she asked. Morales didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at her, face pale, gaunt, but finally lit by something other than despair. "You come with us," he said gently. "We'll take you to Noah. You'll be with him. And from there, we figure it out. Together." Ava stared out at the pond, eyes unfocused. Does he know I'm not there?" Morales paused, then smiled softly. "He knows the one who sent the dog never gave up." She finally looked at him and nodded. It wasn't confident. It wasn't strong. But it was enough. He stood and reached out a hand. She took it. She didn't look like someone anyone would notice, just another figure slumped on a public bench, arms wrapped around herself, hood drawn low over her face. In a city that moved fast, people like her became part of the background, too quiet to disturb, too fragile to confront. But Morales noticed. Because some silences didn't blend in. They hummed, like the kind that only came from a soul wound too deep for words. He slowed as he approached, his boots quiet over the wet leaves. Officer Hill flanked him a step behind, alert but non-threatening. The woman didn't lift her head, just curled in tighter, like the last piece of warmth she had left was buried inside her own ribs. "Ava," Morales said softly. No response. "Ava," he said again, crouching beside the bench now. "It's okay. We're here to help." She trembled, but didn't move. Morales's voice dropped to something barely above a whisper. "I know it's been hard. I know you've been scared." Still nothing. So he said the only thing that could reach her. "Your baby is alive." She froze completely, as if every nerve in her body had just stopped firing, like the world had gone mute except for those 4 impossible words. Her hands loosened from her sleeves, her shoulders locked, her head turned slightly. "What?" The word cracked out of her, brittle and small. Morales took a breath. "We found the child. He's at Grace Memorial Hospital. He's safe. He's stable." Her hood fell back as she sat up too fast. Eyes wild, face pale and tear-streaked, lips trembling. "Milo?" she gasped. "Milo, he's alive?" The disbelief hit her like a wave, and she collapsed forward, her hands clawing at her own chest, as if trying to anchor herself to the reality she'd just been given. "No, no, no, I thought—" Her voice broke. Her body began to shake. The sobs came hard, ripping out of her like a storm had broken inside her lungs. Officer Hill stepped back instinctively, moved by the rawness of it all. Morales stayed. He didn't reach for her, didn't speak, just let her crumble, because sometimes breaking was the only way a person could begin again. Ava sank to her knees beside the bench, forehead pressed to the cold wooden slats, her fingers gripping the edge like it was the only thing keeping her upright. "I sent him with Shadow," she cried. "I didn't know if he'd make it. He was all I had." "I know," Morales said gently. "And he made it because of you." She shook her head violently, hair sticking to her cheeks. "I was so tired. I couldn't keep him warm anymore. We had no food. I didn't want to die with him in my arms. I thought maybe Shadow could—" Her voice dissolved into a whisper. "Do it, I couldn't." Morales knelt beside her, lowering his voice as if they were the only 2 people on earth. "He did. He walked him all the way to Grace, never stopped, never looked away, never let go." Ava looked up at him, eyes wide and red. He didn't leave him?" Morales shook his head slowly. "Not for 1 second." The pain in her face twisted into something unnameable, grief and relief, braided so tightly it couldn't be pulled apart. She nodded once, then twice, like she was trying to convince herself this wasn't some cruel trick. "I thought I'd never see him again," she whispered. "I thought I'd already said goodbye." Morales's tone softened even more. "You haven't. Not yet." The paramedics arrived a few minutes later, called in advance to assess her condition. Ava let them check her vitals, her skin cold to the touch, blood pressure low. But she kept repeating only one thing. "I need to see him. Please, please, I need to see him." Morales helped her to her feet, wrapping the thermal blanket around her shoulders. "We'll take you now." As they led her back to the cruiser, she paused. Her eyes scanned the park, the bench, the pond, the quiet space where she had come to disappear, and then she looked up at the sky. where clouds had just begun to part, letting slivers of gold through. Her lips parted, and she whispered it into the wind. "Thank you, Shadow." Inside the cruiser, Ava sat in the back seat, hugging the blanket to her chest like a lifeline. Her knees bounced from adrenaline. Her eyes kept flicking toward the window. As Morales pulled into traffic, she finally asked, "Is he okay? Really okay?" Morales didn't glance back. He kept his voice steady, reassuring. "He's strong, just like his mother." The inside of the ambulance was warm, but Ava still shivered beneath the blanket. She sat on the gurney upright, arms wrapped around herself, staring at the floor between her bare feet as if her past were still pooled there, waiting to be stepped in. The paramedic had offered her water again, but she hadn't touched it since the park. Morales sat across from her, buckled into the side bench, elbows on his knees, watching her without pushing. The siren wasn't on. They weren't rushing. Not anymore. There was nowhere left to run. Only the truth now. Ava blinked slowly, her voice hoarse from sobbing, but steadying. "His name is Milo," she whispered. Morales nodded. "It's a good name." She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just inhaled like she was remembering how breath worked. "I was doing okay after I left his dad," she said. "You know, I had a job at a diner, nothing fancy. We had a one-bedroom apartment. It wasn't much, but it was enough." She looked up briefly. Her eyes weren't looking at Morales. They were somewhere else. Then she continued. "Then I missed one shift because Milo got sick. Then they stopped scheduling me." She bit her bottom lip. "After that, things just kind of slid. Like one thing after another. Rent overdue, utilities cut, food stamps delayed. It's like the world has this way of punishing you for already being behind." Morales didn't interrupt, just listened. Ava pressed her palms together. They were raw, cracked at the knuckles. She didn't seem to notice. "Shadow was already with me when I got pregnant. He wasn't mine at first. My neighbor was a vet tech, rescued him from a guy who used to train police dogs and treat them like they were disposable." Morales nodded slightly. That explained the discipline, the resilience. "He wasn't easy at first," she continued. "Didn't let anyone touch him, wouldn't bark, wouldn't eat unless it was from your hand. But he always watched. Always knew what I was feeling, like he didn't trust people, but he trusted pain." She closed her eyes for a long moment. "When Milo was born, Shadow changed, like completely. He slept beside the crib, alerted me when the baby stirred before I heard anything. Once Milo had a fever and I slept through my alarm. Shadow barked until I woke up." She shook her head. "No one teaches a dog that." "No," Morales said softly. "They just know." She looked at him then, really looked at him. "There's this moment that breaks you," she said. "It's not loud. It's not even dramatic. It's just one night you realize the fridge is empty. There's no diapers left. The lights won't come back on. And you've stopped telling your baby it's okay because you don't believe it anymore." Morales felt the weight of her words settle deep. "I sat in that house for 2 days without eating," she whispered. "I just held Milo. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I was past that. But Shadow, he kept walking in and out. He kept checking the door. He was pacing, like he was waiting for me to move." "And when you didn't?" Morales asked. She let out a breath that trembled. "I told him to go." Tears welled again, but she didn't look away. I wrapped Milo in the last clean blanket we had. I kissed him on the forehead. I knelt in front of Shadow and I begged him. I said, "Please, get him somewhere safe." And he took him. She wiped her cheek with the back of her hand. "I didn't want to die," she added softly. "But I couldn't let Milo die with me." Morales leaned forward. "You didn't fail him, Ava. You saved him. The world failed you, but you still found a way to give him a chance." She looked down. "I never thought I'd see him again." "You will," Morales said gently. "You're almost there." She nodded once, just enough to be real. "And Shadow?" she asked. "He's with us." He never left Milo's side. Even at the hospital, he wouldn't stop watching that door. At that, something broke behind her eyes. Not pain this time, but something more fragile. Hope. Ava wrapped her arms tighter around her chest and rocked forward slightly, as if to hold in everything threatening to escape her again. "I didn't think anyone would understand," she said. Morales gave a tired smile. "You'd be surprised what people understand when they're not looking to judge." The ambulance slowed. Outside the window, the hospital came into view. Lights steady, doors open, life still waiting. Ava reached down, brushing a piece of lint from her lap. Her hands still trembled, but they weren't clenched anymore. Inside that moving box of steel and fluorescent light, surrounded by strangers and scars she hadn't yet begun to heal, Ava made the smallest of decisions, to not look back, only forward, toward the boy who still breathed, toward the dog who never gave up, toward something, finally, like home. It had started with silence, the kind that filled every room like fog thick, low, inescapable. Ava sat on the edge of the bed, barely breathing. Milo curled against her chest. His body was too still. His cry had gone hoarse hours ago, and now even that was gone, replaced by a weak, uneven wheeze. The radiator hadn't worked in days. The electricity had been cut last week. Outside, frost formed webs across the inside of the windows. But it wasn't the cold that was killing them. It was the slow unraveling of hope. Shadow paced the room, back and forth, then to the door, then back again. His claws tapped gently on the floorboards, each step louder against the stillness than any scream could have been. He hadn't eaten in 2 days. He hadn't slept in more. His ribs were beginning to show again, but he never stopped moving. He had been watching Ava for hours, watching as she held Milo tighter, as her eyes grew more distant, as the weight of decisions that no mother should ever have to make settled across her spine. And then she moved. She laid Milo down gently on the tattered blanket spread across the mattress. Her fingers shook as she reached for the flannel one, the soft blue one with faded stars. She wrapped it carefully around his tiny body, tucking it under his chin like she had so many times before. But this time, she didn't pick him back up. Instead, she turned to Shadow. The dog sat at the foot of the bed, tail still, ears alert, watching her with those endless, steady eyes. Ava crouched down in front of him. "I need you to do something," she whispered. Her voice cracked. "Something I shouldn't be asking." Shadow didn't move. She pressed her forehead gently against his. "You know how to get to people. You always did." He blinked slowly, breath shallow. She unwrapped the edge of the blanket again and carefully, hesitantly, lifted Milo from the bed, her hands trembling with a mix of instinct and devastation. Then, softly, like breaking glass in her throat, she lowered the swaddled infant toward the dog. Shadow leaned back slightly at first, confused, concerned. "I trust you," she whispered. "You've never let us down." The room went completely still. Ava brought the bundle to his muzzle and waited. Shadow sniffed it once, then again. His ears tilted forward, his muscles tensing beneath his coat. For a brief moment he looked at her, eyes wide, questioning, afraid to move, and in that moment she broke. Tears streamed down her cheeks. "I can't carry him any more," she whispered. "But you can, please. Find help." She placed Milo gently into Shadow's mouth. The dog hesitated. A pause that felt eternal, his jaw trembling ever so slightly around the fragile weight. He looked down at the baby, then up at Ava. His legs shook not from fatigue, but from the gravity of the command. "No one's coming," Ava whispered through her tears. "Unless it's you." Shadow made a sound low rumbling, not a growl, not a whine, a sound of protest, of knowing what it meant to leave, of understanding that what he was being asked to do was the last thing he wanted. Ava nodded slowly, more to herself than to him. "I love you," she whispered. "Both of you." She stood, backed away from the door, and said the word she'd never forget. "Go." Shadow looked at her one last time, then turned and ran. His paws hit the hardwood floor like a heartbeat, down the hallway, through the door she had left open, into the frost-bitten morning air, the sky overcast and gray, no collar, no leash, no plan, just instinct and loyalty and a baby in his jaws. Back in the ambulance, Ava jolted slightly, snapping back from the memory. Her eyes blinked into focus. She looked at Morales beside her, lips parted, chest rising fast. "I told him to go," she said, her voice hollow. "I didn't think I'd ever see either of them again." Morales said nothing for a long time, then quietly, "But you did." Ava's eyes welled again, but this time she didn't look away. She let the tears fall, let the weight lift, because that moment, the moment she had trusted a dog with her son's life, hadn't been the end. It had been the beginning. The automatic doors of Grace Memorial whispered open with a hiss. Ava stepped inside hesitantly, as if the warmth and light might reject her after everything. Her shoes borrowed from the shelter squeaked faintly against the polished floor. Her hands fidgeted with the hospital bracelet that had been clipped to her wrist. She hadn't noticed it when they put it on, only now did it feel like something real. Morales walked beside her, saying nothing. She could feel his presence, solid and grounding, like a silent promise that whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone. The nurse behind the desk looked up, eyes softening, when she saw Ava. "NICU," Morales said gently. "We'll heal for the baby." The nurse nodded, buzzed them through. The hallway narrowed. The air cooled. Machines hummed. And every step Ava took was a step into the unknown, the terrifying, hopeful unknown. The door to the NICU opened with a muted click. The scent of antiseptic greeted her first, sharp, sterile, somehow clean and cruel all at once. She paused on the threshold. Rows of transparent incubators glowed softly beneath gentle lights. Tiny bodies lay cocooned in warmth and wires. There was something sacred about the silence in that room, not absence, but reverence. And then, at the far end, next to a monitor blinking in quiet rhythm, she saw him, Milo, wrapped in white, breathing through a tube. His chest rose with help, but it rose, He was there. He was alive. Her knees nearly gave out. She moved toward him slowly, afraid to break the moment, afraid it might vanish if she blinked too hard. When she reached the incubator, the nurse beside it stepped back wordlessly, giving her space. Ava reached forward, her hand trembling. The warmth of the plastic cover surprised her, but not as much as the warmth of his skin when she touched his cheek through the open panel. His skin was soft, too soft. His face thinner than she remembered, his lips parted slightly with each breath the machine helped him take. But his eyelids fluttered, and that was all it took. Ava let out a sound that wasn't quite a sob and wasn't quite a prayer, but something caught between surrender and salvation. She leaned over, resting her forehead against the edge of the incubator, her hand never leaving his face. "I am here," she whispered. "Mama's here." Behind her, footsteps padded quietly. Shadow entered the NICU without making a sound, his massive frame somehow respectful of the space. He didn't bark, didn't whine. He simply walked until he was beside her, then sat, his head turned slightly toward the infant. No leash, no order, just purpose. The staff didn't stop him. They didn't even move. Somehow, everyone knew this wasn't just a dog. This was family. Ava turned to him, her cheeks wet with silent tears. She dropped to her knees beside him. "I don't know how you did it," she said, voice breaking, "but you brought him back." Shadow didn't blink, didn't move. He just watched Milo, still, alert, anchored, like he'd been standing guard over the soul of the boy long before the machine started helping. Like he had never stopped believing that this moment, this exact moment would come. Ava placed a hand gently on Shadow's neck. His fur was still matted in places. Patches of dried mud clung to his side, but he didn't flinch, didn't shift away. He had carried the weight of that bundle across the city, through chaos, through fear. And now, finally, he had laid it down. Ava leaned her forehead to his. "Thank you," she whispered. It wasn't enough, but it was all she had. In the quiet rhythm of machines, something stirred. Milo's fingers twitched. Ava gasped. Shadow stood up slightly, ears perking. Milo's eyes fluttered, not open, not fully awake, but responding. A nurse noticed, smiled softly, made a note on the chart. Ava didn't say anything. She just kept her hand on her son's face and her other on the dog who had never given up. And for the first time in weeks, maybe longer, she breathed. That night, under hospital lights and quiet machines, a mother was reunited with her son. And beside them, watching, always stood a guardian who didn't need words to say, "I kept my promise." The early morning light bled through the NICU window like a soft hush. It was barely dawn, but Ava hadn't moved from the chair beside Milo's incubator all night. Her body ached, her head throbbed from lack of sleep, but none of it mattered. She sat curled with her hands folded in her lap, her gaze never leaving the soft rise and fall of her son's chest. Shadow was sprawled quietly at her feet, his head resting on his paws, ears twitching at every mechanical beep. His breathing was slow now, heavy from exhaustion, but he never fully let go, even in rest. He guarded. Milo stirred. At first, Ava thought she imagined it, a flicker, a shift in the rhythm. Then she saw it again, his fingers. They moved, just a twitch, then again. She stood so quickly her chair scraped the floor. "Doctor," she whispered, then louder, "Doctor!" A nurse on the other side of the unit turned sharply. "What is it?" "His hand, he moved, he—" But she couldn't finish, because Milo's eyes were opening. The flutter of his eyelids felt impossibly slow, as if the whole world had narrowed to that single, fragile action. A nurse rushed over, calling for the attending, but Ava didn't look away. Not now. Not after all this. Milo's eyes, dark, wide, slightly unfocused, found her, and in that moment Ava broke in the quietest, deepest way. "Milo," she whispered, stepping closer, trembling. "Hi, baby, I'm here." His chest shuddered once. His fingers curled around nothing in particular, then a twitch at the corner of his mouth, a soft, hesitant, almost imperceptible upturn, a smile. The nurse gasped audibly. The attending physician arrived, flipping through the vitals, eyes darting to the monitor, then back to the child. "This is unexpected," the doctor murmured, clearly trying to remain composed. "His neural response shouldn't be this developed yet. Not after—" He didn't finish the sentence, but Ava didn't need him to. She reached through the small port on the side of the incubator and brushed her fingers softly across Milo's cheek. "You know me, don't you?" she whispered, her voice barely holding. "You know you're safe." Milo blinked. The smile lingered, faint but present. Shadow lifted his head, watching closely. The room buzzed in low murmurs as staff whispered in disbelief, recalibrated equipment, and jotted notes, but Ava only had eyes for her son. She crouched beside the incubator, forehead nearly touching the plastic, her fingers still reaching in. "He knows he's home," she said softly. "He waited for me." Behind her, one of the nurses paused, lips parting slightly as emotion welled in her throat. No one could explain this, not with charts, not with scans, but they all felt it. Some things don't need to be explained. Some things are just true. Minutes passed, then an hour. Ava never left his side. Shadow slowly pushed himself up and moved beside her, resting his head gently against her thigh. She lowered her hand to him, brushing behind his ear. "You did this," she whispered. Shadow didn't move, didn't need to. He'd carried the child when Ava couldn't, stood watch when no one else knew there was something worth protecting. And now he watched as something impossible unfolded in front of them both. A child who shouldn't be responding this soon. Smiling. Later, the doctor returned with new readings. "His oxygen saturation has stabilized," he said, half speaking to Ava, half to the team. "His heart rate is consistent, and we're seeing neural activity we didn't expect to see for another 2 to 3 days, minimum." He paused. "This is very, very good." Ava nodded, her eyes shining. "I know." The doctor studied her, then the dog beside her, then the child. He didn't say it out loud, but something in the room had changed. Not just medically, not just emotionally, spiritually. As the machines hummed their quiet chorus, the three of them remained there, mother, child, and dog. No longer separate, no longer lost, but connected by something unspoken and unshakable. A pact written not in words, but in breath, in trust, in sacrifice, and in one faint, miraculous smile that said more than any thank you ever could. By mid-afternoon, The NICU had quieted again, but in the nurse break room, Shadow had become the subject of murmured reverence. "He didn't growl, didn't even bark," said one nurse, arms crossed as she stared out the window. "He just walked in like he belonged, like he knew where to go." Another, seated at the counter, sipped cold coffee. "He didn't drop the baby. Not once. You realize how precise he had to be to carry a newborn that far? No blood, no bruising, just mud and that cloth bundle." A third nurse added, "I swear he looked me in the eye, like he was asking us to help." The room fell silent again. It wasn't the kind of story they were used to telling in hospitals, but it was the kind that stayed with you because it reminded you that not all heroes came through the front door in uniform. Some padded in on 4 legs, dripping rainwater, with a soul too old for this world. Outside, Morales stood near the nurse's station with a tablet in his hand and a slow breath caught in his chest. The collar had confirmed nothing. No tags, no chip, no ID. But his instincts told him otherwise. This dog wasn't wild. He wasn't abandoned. He was trained, and trained well. Shadow sat nearby, upright and still, his ears alert to every hallway footstep, every squeak of a rubber sole. His eyes flicked toward the NICU door occasionally, but never left Morales for long. A few feet away, Ava watched from her seat, Milo finally asleep again. "You know him, don't you?" she asked softly. Morales nodded. "Not personally, but I've met a few like him." He crouched, meeting Shadow at eye level. "No civilian dog sits like that, holds posture like that. No civilian dog carries a baby like cargo, safe, deliberate, focused." Shadow didn't react, but he didn't look away. Morales smiled faintly. "Yeah, you're one of ours, aren't you?" Later that day, Morales pulled some old records, not from the local precinct, but from a joint K-9 military police task force database. It took him a few tries, several false leads, mismatched IDs, and finally a scan of archived disappearance reports. And then there it was. Unit K-9 1-Teen Maximus Handler, Sergeant Daniel Riker, deceased. Mission status: failed extraction. Dog presumed dead. Body unrecovered. Morales stared at the screen. The last update was 2 years ago. The dog's photo, a younger, sharper version, flashed up beside the report. German Shepherd, deep amber eyes, scar on the right flank. He looked back toward the hallway where Shadow still waited outside the NICU door, ever vigilant, same eyes, same scar, same quiet loyalty, and a heart that hadn't stopped working, even after the world gave up on him. That evening, Morales returned to the hospital with printed files. He handed them to Ava. She turned the papers slowly, absorbing every word. "They said he died?" she asked. Morales nodded. "Disappeared during a botched rescue op overseas. His handler didn't make it. The unit assumed the worst. I don't think anyone expected him to survive." Ava looked toward Shadow, her throat tightening. "But he did. And not just survive," Morales said. "He carried on, alone." She knelt, pressing her forehead against Shadow's neck. "You've been protecting people your whole life," she whispered, "and you never stopped. From that moment forward, everyone at Grace Memorial called him by a new name, not Maximus, not the ghost of some lost unit, but Shadow, because that's what he had become, the constant guardian, the presence that slipped through alleys, under fences, and across neighborhoods, the one who moved in silence, but always found the light. The sun had dipped behind the hills when Shadow finally gave in. After hours of holding vigil, of watching every door, every passing nurse, every flicker of movement in the NICU glass, his legs began to shake under him. His ears drooped, no longer sharp with anticipation, and the glint in his eyes, once vigilant, almost defiant, now softened to something else. Fatigue, deep and earned. The vet from Animal Control arrived quietly. No sirens, no drama. Just a small crate of supplies, a soft voice, and the slow, deliberate movements of someone who'd handled hundreds of dogs, but still treated each one like the only. "He's not fighting me," the vet said with a frown. "That's not normal. Most working dogs resist until they pass out, but this one, it's like he knows he's allowed to stop now." Ava sat nearby, still in the same oversized sweater someone from the hospital had lent her. Her hair was tied back hastily, eyes rimmed red, but focused solely on Shadow. She watched as they checked his pads torn and raw, his ribs protruding, his hind leg slightly swollen from a sprain he must have been walking on for days. Through all of it, Shadow made no sound, no whine, no growl. He just looked at Ava like he was apologizing for needing help. When the vet finished cleaning his paws and bandaging his leg, she gently placed a folded towel down and stepped back. "He needs rest. Fluids. A warm place to sleep, that's all I can give him now," she said. Then, after a beat, "That, and maybe a little kindness." Ava nodded, slowly lowering herself beside him. She didn't cry. Not now. Not when he needed steadiness more than sympathy. Instead, she held out her hand, palm open and trembling slightly. "Come here, sweetheart." Shadow shifted. First unsure, then like a wave finally breaking after holding back the sea, he stepped forward and laid his head in her lap. Not cautiously, not hesitantly, but fully, with the weight of someone who had carried too much for too long. The moment felt too sacred for words. A few nurses walking by slowed their pace, eyes softening. One even put a hand to her heart, whispering something that sounded like, "He knows, he really knows." Ava stroked the fur between Shadow's ears, fingers brushing through the dirt and dried blood that still clung there. "You saved us," she whispered. Her voice cracked, but she didn't look away. "Not just Milo, not just me. You saved something I thought was already gone." Shadow didn't move, but his breathing slowed, deeper now, steadier. For the first time in what felt like years, he let go. Outside, the world kept moving. Phones rang, machines beeped, cars passed by on the street like nothing had happened. But inside that little corner of the hospital, a moment hung suspended in quiet grace. A mother, a child, and a broken dog who refused to quit until they were safe. The next hour passed in near silence. Shadow slept, his body curled tightly, one ear still angled toward the NICU window. Ava stayed beside him the whole time. When someone offered her food, she shook her head. When someone asked if she wanted a room to rest in, she just replied, "Not yet." Because this was rest, not sleep, but peace, the first she'd known in a long time. At one point, a small boy walked past with his mother. He paused when he saw Shadow, tugged on her sleeve, and whispered, "Mom, that's the dog from the TV." The mother smiled, then knelt and said softly, "That's the hero, sweetheart." But Shadow didn't flinch at the word. He didn't seek the praise. He only opened his eyes briefly, checked on Ava, and closed them again. He didn't need medals. He didn't need recognition. He just needed this, to know that what he fought for was still alive, still breathing, still here. And so, in the quiet hush of nightfall, beneath fluorescent lights and the scent of antiseptic and hope, Shadow finally allowed himself to rest. His head nestled into Ava's lap, her hand on his back, and in the space between brokenness and healing, they stayed, together, alive. By morning, the world had taken notice. The grainy hospital footage, no edits, no narration, showed a mud-streaked German shepherd pushing through automatic doors, a bundle in his jaws. He paused. He waited. His eyes scanned the room, pleading, but silent. Then the gasp, the rush, the voices. The baby, Milo. By noon, the video had hit 1 million views. By nightfall, the world called it a miracle. They called him Shadow. News anchors told the story like folklore, a silent guardian, a dog who knew. But no headline could explain what it felt like when he walked in, when Milo opened his eyes, when Ava whispered, "You saved us," not to a doctor, but to a dog. The outpouring began as small, a box of blankets, a letter from a veteran. That dog is trained. That dog didn't quit. Then it flooded, diapers, gift cards, notes for the dog who didn't give up. A crowdfunding page hit 100,000. Then people began to show up, not for cameras, but with casseroles, coats, and offers. A florist left a card. "You reminded me kindness still matters." When asked what she needed most, Ava answered, "Just a place where Milo can be safe and where Shadow can rest." The next day, the nonprofit Homeward Hands arrived. Pet-friendly, safe, rent-free for a year, they said, handing her a key. The apartment was modest. Peeling paint, creaky heater, cracked tiles, but the door locked. The walls didn't shake. And for the first time in months, Ava didn't look over her shoulder. Donations had furnished the place. A used crib, mismatched sheets, a sagging couch that smelled like detergent. A large dog bed sat in the corner with a note, "For the guardian who brought them home." Shadow didn't use it. He paced room to room, then finally lay at Milo's crib. Ava stared at a grocery bag left by a volunteer. Potatoes, rice, a packet of chicken. She hadn't cooked in weeks. Her hands trembled as she lit the burner. The scent of food filled the room like a memory, not from onions, but from the fact that she could do this again. Feed her son, feed herself, feed the dog who never gave up. Later, they sat together. Ava with a chipped bowl, Milo in her arms, Shadow curled at her feet, half asleep, always watchful. No tea, no music, just silence, but not the heavy kind. This was peace. She whispered to Shadow, "First time I've seen you sleep without one eye open." His tail flicked once. That was enough. She thought of the hunger, the cold, the goodbye she'd whispered when she let him go, never expecting an answer. But he had answered. With every instinct, with every ounce of strength, he'd chosen people, light, hope. Now they were here, together. On the counter lay a folded pamphlet. Job programs, childcare, support groups. She hadn't opened it, not because she wasn't ready, because for once she didn't feel rushed. She had time. That night she tucked Milo in. Shadow was still at the crib. He met her gaze. "We're gonna be okay," she whispered, stroking his fur. The apartment wasn't much, but it was theirs. Outside, wind rustled a stubborn tree. Inside, Ava rocked Milo, his breath warm against her collarbone. His blanket had tiny clouds stitched along the edges, a gift from someone they'd never meet. Shadow lay nearby, body angled to watch the front door. Even in sleep he guarded. Even now, he stayed. Milo stirred. Ava's hand soothed him. She whispered, "We made it, baby," then looked at the dog who never left. "Because of you?" She leaned back against the wall, letting the silence surround her, not cold, but reverent. She thought of the park bench. The moment she said go, she never expected him to return, but Shadow had come back with help, with hope, and now he was here, still here. Tears welled not from fear, but from survival. "We're still here," she whispered. Shadow's ear twitched. Milo sighed. Ava smiled through the blur. It wasn't a miracle. It was 3 broken souls refusing to let go. A mother who dared to trust again. A dog who remembered what he was trained for and what he wasn't. And a baby the world almost forgot. She kissed Milo's head, rested her hand on Shadow's shoulder. Then, for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself something simple: to close her eyes, to breathe, to feel safe. Outside, the street light flickered, and inside, under a worn roof, 3 survivors slept: Ava, Milo, and Shadow together. It was a clear morning, the kind that felt borrowed from another seasoned gentle breeze, soft sun, and the hum of a city just waking up. In front of City Hall, folding chairs had been set in uneven rows across the concrete. A modest podium stood beneath a blue banner hastily printed with block letters, "In honor of Shadow, a hero's instinct." Most of the attendees were city officials, a few uniformed officers, and civilians who had followed the story online. Cameramen adjusted tripods. A microphone gave off faint feedback. The mayor rehearsed her speech under her breath, flipping through cue cards like she barely believed the words she was about to say. But in the back row, tucked away from the flashbulbs and handshakes, stood Ava. Shadow sat beside her, his posture erect, his expression unreadable. As always, his body remained still, but his eyes never stopped scanning. Milo was in her arms, swaddled in a fresh blanket that smelled of detergent and morning air. He reached out toward Shadow, now and then, small fingers waving. The dog didn't flinch, but Ava could tell he noticed. He always did. The ceremony began without fanfare. A city official cleared his throat and tapped the mic. "We gather here today to honor an extraordinary animal." Words followed, about bravery, about loyalty, about instinct and sacrifice. A plaque was unveiled. A small medal, etched with Shadow's name, was displayed on a velvet pillow. Cameras clicked like popcorn. None of it made Shadow move. He stayed next to Ava and Milo, unfazed by the crowd, uninterested in the spotlight. His gaze remained fixed on something far more important: them. A few feet away, Officer Morales stood in uniform, arms crossed. His eyes weren't on the mayor. They were on Shadow. "He don't care about medals," he muttered to another officer. "He just did what he was trained to do, and what no one else could." The officer nodded. "Still, he deserves it?" Morales' voice softened. "Yeah, he does." When Ava was invited to come forward and accept the plaque on Shadow's behalf, she hesitated. The crowd turned. Eyes watched. Phones rose in unison. But she didn't move for applause. She stepped forward because she owed it to the one who had never left her behind. Shadow followed at her side, leash loose, head high, but wary. Even now, surrounded by attention, he positioned himself slightly in front of her. Protective? A silent barrier between her and the world. She took the plaque with shaking hands. A few people clapped, but all she heard was the steady rhythm of Shadow's breathing beside her. I don't know what to say, she began quietly. This dog, he didn't just save my son's life. He saved mine, too. She glanced down at him. I didn't have hope left, but he did. He remembered what we forgot, that life matters, that someone always matters. The wind lifted her hair gently. Her voice wavered, but didn't break. And when no one else came, he did. She didn't need to say more. The silence that followed was more honest than any speech. Afterward, as the crowd milled about, Shadow refused every attempt to pet him, sniffing warily at outstretched hands before leaning back into Ava's leg. A journalist knelt for a photo. Shadow turned his head away. Guess he's not much for press, someone joked. Ava just smiled faintly. He already got what he came for. They slipped away before the refreshments. No one stopped them. And even though the city now had a plaque on the wall and a headline in the papers and a few thousand clicks on a news video, the only thing that mattered was this: a mother, a child, and the dog who never asked for recognition because he had already been given something better, a home. The light in Morales's office was always a little too yellow, too dim. It clung to old case files like dust. Outside the window, the city was fading into dusk, the skyline a blur of amber and gray. But Morales wasn't looking outside. He was staring at a manila folder that hadn't been touched in 2 years. Its corners were frayed. A water stain warped the cover. It had once been marked active, MIA in red. Then someone crossed that out and scrawled, closed, no recovery. The dog's name had been different then. K9 Unit, Max. No mention of Shadow, just Max. No medals, no headlines, just a file and a memory Morales hadn't wanted to believe until now. He flipped it open slowly, like peeling back layers of a wound. Photos, maps, operation logs, debrief sheets. It came flooding back. Camp Trevor's, the raid on the warehouse outside the city, the intel that had fallen apart mid-mission. Mac's handler officer Brent Halder had died in the chaos. Crossfire. Wrong place, wrong second. The unit pulled out under heavy fire. Max had been seen running after Brent, refusing to retreat. Then, nothing. No GPS signal, no recovered body, no witness, just gone. They listed him as presumed dead in action. But something in Morales had never let go. Now, watching the dog rest under Ava's arm during the ceremony, something clicked. The way he scanned the room, the way he positioned himself. That rigid canine discipline that didn't just vanish with time. Morales dug deeper. He pulled up Halder's final training logs. The note read, Max excels at infant response scenarios. Strong maternal tracking bond. Unshakable under pressure. If anything ever happens to me, he'll keep going. Morales swallowed. He did, he whispered. He traced the timeline. 2 years, 2 winters, 2 summers, countless storms. And somehow this dog had survived, alone, but not idle, waiting, watching, protecting a woman and a child that weren't even his by duty, but by something older, something deeper. He looked at the last line on the report. Final objective, protect civilians. Prevent unnecessary loss of life. Remain in proximity if no handler is available. And Shadow had done just that. He had completed his final directive alone, unnamed and unacknowledged. Morales leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. Then he reached for a sticky note and then scrawled a line across it in sharp, deliberate print. Survived, stayed, saved. He placed it over the closed, no recovery label. Because it wasn't true anymore. The story wasn't over. Somewhere in a modest apartment on the east side, a baby was sleeping in peace. A mother was breathing easier. And a dog once left behind in a world that had no more orders for him was finally home again. Because he didn't forget who he was. Even when the world did, the photo didn't go viral right away. It didn't have filters or motion graphics or headlines screaming for attention. There was no award-winning journalist behind the lens, just a freelancer named Camille Thorne who'd been working a side piece on homelessness and survival in the city. She almost didn't take the shot. It was late. She was tired. The park had gone still. Then she saw them. A woman curled on a bench, cradling a baby beneath a thin blanket. The baby's head rested in the crook of her arm, lips parted in sleep. A small duffel bag lay at her feet. But what caught Camille's eye wasn't the woman or the child. It was the dog, a German shepherd. His fur streaked with dirt, eyes half-lidded but alert. He was sitting at the base of the bench, chest puffed, head slightly tilted, watching everything. Not restless, not aggressive, just there, still, guarding. She lifted her camera out of instinct more than intention. Click. She didn't know their names. Didn't know the dog had carried that child through automatic hospital doors, or that he'd once belonged to a K-9 unit declared lost in action. She just knew this. It wasn't a photo of people sleeping rough. It was a portrait of loyalty, of devotion that didn't need words or ceremony. The next day, she uploaded it with a simple caption. He didn't just guard a baby, he guarded a family. And somehow that was enough. By noon, the post had been shared thousands of times. People weren't just liking it, they were feeling it. I've never seen a dog sit like that. Look at his eyes. He's still working. He knew exactly what he was doing. The story behind the image came out slowly, piece by piece. Someone in the comments recognized the dog from the Grace Memorial reports. Another shared the mayor's speech. Someone else dropped the link to the ceremony video. And suddenly, Shadow wasn't just a photo anymore. He was a symbol. Not of heroism with lights and sirens, but of the kind that lies quiet beneath hardship, of watching over someone even when you're hungry, of staying awake when everyone else is sleeping. Camille was flooded with requests, interviews, photo rights, even offers to monetize the image. She turned them all down. "This one belongs to them," she said, and she meant it. Because no matter how many clicks it got, nothing could capture the moment better than the way Shadow had sat that night with the unwavering stillness of something ancient and true. Morales printed the photo and pinned it on the precinct's corkboard. No frame, no caption. Just the image. When rookies walked by and asked, "Who's that?" he always said the same thing. That's what loyalty looks like. Ava never knew about the photo until much later. When she finally saw it, her breath caught. Not because she remembered the coldness of that bench or the ache in her arms from holding Milo through the night, but because she hadn't realized anyone else had seen it, anyone else had noticed him. She placed a printout in a cheap frame and set it beside Milo's crib. Sometimes at night, when the baby stirred, Shadow would lift his head and look at the picture, not like he recognized it, but like he knew what it stood for, and Ava would whisper into the dark, "We remember." Because not every story begins with a hero. Sometimes it begins with a shadow and ends with the kind of love that never leaves your side. The walls were soft blue, not sterile, just quiet, like they were trying to hush the noise Ava hadn't realized she carried. She sat on the couch, hands wrapped around a paper cup of lukewarm tea. Across from her, Lynn waited. "I'm not crazy," Ava blurted. "I just don't sleep." Dr. Lynn nodded. "They said I'm lucky," she added, "that Milo made it, that I made it, but I don't feel lucky." She didn't say how every siren made her jump, or that sometimes she reached for Shadow in the night, not for comfort, but permission to fall apart. "You survived something," Dr. Lynn said, "but surviving and healing are different things." A single tear escaped Ava's cheek. Later, pushing Milo's stroller, Shadow trotted beside her. They stopped by the bulletin board. One flyer read, "Support Group for Mothers in Recovery, Thursdays at 6 p.m. She tore off the tab with shaking fingers. That evening, in the quiet apartment, she whispered, "You think I can do this?" Shadow nudged her wrist. She showed up that Thursday, didn't speak, just listened. One woman said, "Some days I feel strong, other days I feel like a fraud wearing skin." Ava nodded. Someone had finally said it. After the meeting, she sat on a bench. Milo slept against her chest. Shadow stood beside her. "You saved him," she whispered, "and somehow you saved me too." She leaned into his fur, and for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel broken, just in repair. It started with a squeal. Pure instinctive joy. Ava dropped the dish in the sink and turned. Milo was giggling on the rug, flinging a tennis ball. Shadow nudged it back each time. "Bah!" Milo cried, bouncing. Ava stood still, hand pressed to her chest. For weeks, life had been recovery, but this was living. Milo collapsed against Shadow's side. The dog curled protectively around him. Ava crouched. "You two are quite the team." Shadow's eyes met hers. No approval needed, just acknowledgement. A family rebuilt by choice, by survival, by love. That night, she lingered by the crib. The room smelled of baby lotion and sun-warmed fur. Shadow lay nearby, not touching but close enough to intervene in a heartbeat. "You gave him this," she said softly, "this peace." Shadow didn't stir, but his breathing matched Milo's calm and rhythmic, a lullaby of its own. She pulled the blanket around her shoulders and smiled. Laughter had returned to the apartment, and it had the name of a boy and the paw prints of a dog who never stopped guarding him. One afternoon, a knock at the door. Morales stood there with a folder. "I've been thinking," he said, "about Shadow. He's different," Ava said. "Not just smart. It's like he feels things before they happen." "That's instinct, married to training," Morales nodded. "I think he's ready for more." Inside the folder, Therapy K-Tie, certification, New Hope program. They work in hospitals, schools, trauma centers, Morales explained. Shadow's already done the hard part. He's connected. Now we give him a new mission. Ava hesitated. "He's tired." "He's waiting," Morales said. "He still listens, still watches. He's not done." Shadow stood in the doorway, head tilted as if he knew. Ava knelt, looking into his eyes. "Is that what you want?" Shadow stepped forward, nudged her hand, once, twice. "He's always known what to do," she smiled. The next week they visited the center. Shadow passed every test with calm precision. When a child burst into tears in the waiting room, Shadow walked over, sat beside him, and rested his head in the boy's lap. The sobbing stopped. One trainer turned to Ava. "We don't need to test him. He's born for this." Back home, Milo played with blocks. Shadow rested beside him. Ava watched them, heart full. "Looks like your new mission starts out." Shadow didn't move, but his stillness said everything. He had once carried a dying baby through darkness. Now he would carry light into other shadows, not by barking, not by chasing, just by being there, silent, steady, present. The air was different now, softer, as if even the wind had learned to whisper, not howl. Ava stood at the edge of the park, one hand in her coat pocket, the other holding a single white flower, fresh but unassuming, the kind that didn't scream for attention, just quietly offered itself as remembrance. Shadow walked beside her, leash slack in her grip, his gait steady despite the stiffness that had begun to touch his joints on colder mornings. The years had etched themselves gently into his coat. Some grays around the muzzle, a slightly slower step, but his presence was just as solid as ever. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The bench was still there, faded, paint peeling, backrest slightly crooked. But it was there, exactly where she remembered it. Ava hesitated before approaching, her breath catching in her throat, not because the memory was fresh, but because it still held weight. This was where she had last sat when hope felt like fiction, where she had clutched her empty arms, eyes blank, stomach hollow, bones brittle from hunger and grief, where she had whispered goodbye, not just to the world, but to herself. She knelt beside the bench, pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket, nothing fancy, just a torn square of notebook paper creased at the corners, written in her familiar, shaky hand. She placed it gently on the wood, then tucked the flower alongside it. The note read, "Thank you for not letting me go." She sat down, letting her fingers graze the backrest. The wood was cold, but not cruel. It greeted her like an old friend, one that had once watched her break apart and now witnessed her stitched back together. "I was going to die here," she whispered. Shadow lay down at her feet, resting his head on his paws. His eyes didn't leave her face. "But you didn't let me," she continued. "You carried more than just Milo that night. You carried all the parts of me I'd forgotten how to hold." Her voice trembled, not with sadness, but with gratitude that ran so deep it scared her to think of what might have happened if fate had twisted 1 inch differently. The sun pierced through the branches above, spilling dappled light onto the grass. Children played in the distance. A woman jogged by with a stroller. Life had gone on, unaware of what had nearly been lost here. But Ava noticed. She noticed everything now. She reached down, brushing her fingers through Shadow's fur. "You've given so much," she said, "and you never asked for anything." Shadow shifted slightly, pressing his body closer to her boots. She smiled through a sting of tears. "So I'll say it for both of us. Thank you." They sat in silence for a long while, not the silence of absence, but the kind born from presence so full words would only cheapen it. Eventually Ava stood. Her hand remained on Shadow's back as he rose beside her, always ready, always beside. She took one last glance at the bench, at the note, at the flower, then turned away and walked forward, because now she wasn't walking away from anything. She was walking toward the life they had fought together to reclaim. The sky was clear, a kind of blue that looked brushed on, as if the world had taken a breath and decided to be kind that morning. Outside a modest two-bedroom house with chipped white siding and flower pots along the porch, 3 figures stood beneath the awning: Ava, Milo, and Shadow. The photographer adjusted his lens, crouched slightly. "Okay, on 3, he called out. 1, 2, 3, Smith." The shutter clicked. Ava's arm was around Milo's shoulders, steady and warm. She wore no makeup, just the tired joy of someone who had earned her peace. Milo, now walking on his own, leaned into her side, grinning wide, his tiny hand clutched tight around the leather leash. At the other end of it sat Shadow, still, regal, a little grayer now. His once glossy coat bore streaks of silver along the snout and ears, the result of years most dogs like him didn't get to live, let alone retire into. But his eyes held the same quiet alertness, the same sense of purpose. He wasn't just part of the picture, he anchored it. After the photos were taken, Ava poured lemonade into mismatched glasses on the porch. "Did you know?" she said, watching Milo and Shadow race clumsily through the patch of lawn. "He used to wake up screaming." The photographer, now packing up, glanced at her. "Milo?" She nodded. "Every night." Then one day it stopped. I asked him why. He said, "Because Shadow sleeps here now," like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Milo came running back, cheeks pink from play. "Mom, Shadow almost beat me." Ava raised an eyebrow. "Almost? Are you sure he didn't let you win?" Milo giggled and flopped beside the old dog, throwing his arms around Shadow's neck in a spontaneous hug. Shadow didn't flinch. He never did. He simply closed his eyes, breathing deep, as if he too understood what this moment meant. It wasn't just another afternoon in a quiet neighborhood. It was the closing of a circle. The boy who'd once been carried in this dog's mouth, barely alive, swaddled in rags, now held his leash with purpose, confidence, a living testimony that healing was not just possible, but lasting. Ava stepped down from the porch and joined them, kneeling beside both of them in the grass. She ran her fingers through Shadow's fur. His heartbeat was slower now, but strong. "Home looks good on us," she whispered. Shadow's tail thumped once, then again. A breeze swept through the trees, rustling the branches gently. A bird chirped from a nearby fence. Somewhere, a door closed, and a neighbor's dog barked twice before quieting. Ordinary things. But Ava had learned that ordinary was the most extraordinary gift of all. Later, as the sun began to set and shadows stretched long across the lawn, she hung the photo on their living room wall. Not in a frame, but in a memory. Because pictures fade. But what they had now, this life rebuilt, this bond that nothing had managed to break, wasn't something ink could capture. It was something that lived in the space between their heartbeats. In the way, Shadow always walked slightly behind Milo, letting the boy lead, but never far enough to stop protecting him. In the way Ava sometimes looked at her son, then at the dog, and blinked back tears she didn't feel ashamed of anymore, the photo would stay, but the story was still being written. The house was quiet, not the kind of silence that feels empty, but the kind that comes after a storm earned, sacred, and full of breath. Somewhere in the distance, a train passed, its faint hum folding into the hush of the night. Ava stood barefoot in the hallway, the soft glow of a nightlight spilling from the nursery onto the floor. One hand held the doorframe, the other curled around a warm mug she hadn't yet sipped. She didn't want to blink, didn't want to miss a second of what lay before her. Inside the room, Milo slept in his crib, small chest rising and falling, fingers twitching slightly in dreams, a faint, content sigh escaping his lips, and next to him, exactly where he'd always been, Shadow lay curled on the floor, his body forming a quiet barrier between the crib and the rest of the world. He wasn't asleep, not really. His ears twitched now and then, catching distant sounds only he seemed to notice. His eyes, dark and steady, stayed fixed on the shadows beyond the window, not with fear, but with readiness. Shadow wasn't keeping watch out of duty anymore. He did it out of love. Ava stepped inside the room, quietly. She didn't want to wake either of them, though she suspected nothing escaped that dog's senses. Shadow's gaze flicked to her while she knowing. She lowered herself to the rug beside him. For a long moment she said nothing. She just listened to the hum of the monitor, the faint tick of the clock on the wall, and the steady rhythm of Milo's breathing. Then finally her voice, low and fragile, "You never stopped watching him, did you?" Shadow didn't move, but his tail brushed the floor once, a slow, soundless thump. Ava smiled, eyes bedewet, but no longer broken. I think I finally get it," she whispered. "Back then, when everything was falling apart, I thought the world had turned its back. I thought no one cared, but you were watching, even when no one else was, even when I couldn't." She reached out and ran her fingers gently behind his ear. The fur was coarse now, a little thinner than before, but the warmth beneath it, the life, was unmistakable. Milo stirred, not fully awake, just enough to murmur something incoherent and stretch his arms outward. One of them landed over the edge of the crib. Shadow lifted his head and nudged the boy's hand gently back onto the mattress. Ava laughed softly under her breath. "You're unbelievable." She leaned forward and placed a kiss on Milo's forehead, then another softer on the top of Shadow's head. "I hope you know," she said, barely above a whisper, "you didn't just save his life. You gave us a reason to believe again. In safety, in love, in second chances." Shadow blinked slowly, then laid his head down on his paws. But his eyes remained open, watching, always watching. Outside the window, the wind shifted the leaves gently, casting soft, moving shadows across the crib. But nothing stirred in the room that Shadow didn't notice. Nothing entered that hadn't been earned. Ava stood again, reluctant to leave, but certain this time that she could. She lingered at the doorway for one last glance, and then, just before turning off the hall light, she whispered into the hush, "Good night, my guardian." Shadow didn't respond. He didn't need to, because the story didn't end here, not while there were still nights to watch over and hearts to protect. In a world that often rushes past the quiet heroes, this story reminds us to pause and listen. Not all protectors wear uniforms. Some walk on four legs, with eyes that speak volumes and hearts that never waver. Shadow wasn't just a dog. He was loyalty made flesh, a silent sentinel who stepped in when hope was nearly lost. He didn't ask for thanks. He didn't need applause. He only needed a reason to keep going, and he found it in a baby's heartbeat, a mother's tear, and a second chance. Let this story remind us of the power of compassion, the strength of those who can't speak, yet understand everything, and the quiet truth that sometimes the smallest act, one bark, one step, one watchful gaze, can rewrite a destiny. To love an animal is to know a love without condition, and to be loved by one, that's a gift beyond words. So tonight, wherever you are, be a little kinder, look a little closer, and if you're lucky enough to share your life with a dog, especially a German Shepherd, hold them tight. Because sometimes the bravest hearts are the ones that beat beside us, silently, faithfully, always watching.